and welcome. Alex Cardell here, Next Culture Network host, with another interview in our Cultural Topics series. Today I'm joined by Beth Lambert, an author, educator, and former healthcare consultant who has monitored and documented the escalating rates of childhood chronic conditions for over a decade. Her first book, A Compromised Generation, provides a thorough analysis of the origins of this modern health crisis and documents how modifications to environmental and lifestyle factors can profoundly influence health outcomes, including full disease reversal. We'll hear more about that. Beth is also the co-author of Brain Under Attack, a resource for parents and caregivers of children with PANS, PANDAS, and autoimmune encephalitis. Beth is the founder and executive director of Epidemic Answers, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to reestablishing vibrant health in our children. She is also the creator and executive producer of the Documenting Hope Project, a multi-year prospective research project and research study and media project that examines the cumulative impact of environmental stressors on health and their mitigation through personalized and systems-based treatment approaches. Beth is the mother of 3 children and is passionate about raising awareness about the connection between daily choices, human health, and planetary health. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Alex. I'm glad to be with you.
You know, I read A Compromised Generation just recently, and I was just, really struck by the fact that, it seemed like you were a total pioneer in 2010 to have such a revolutionary idea that, this idea that what goes on around us is hugely impactful as far as our health and our relationships and our well-being, all those things. And so I'm wondering what kind of trends you've seen since then that support that movement, and things that have shown up positively, and maybe things that are still, things we really still need to work on.
Yeah, when I published that book in 2010, I felt like a state of panic. And it's why I published the book, because I was a reasonably new mother and I was involved in a lot of, preschool activities, and I was involved in baby play groups, and I was just around a lot of little children. And because of that, I saw firsthand that all of these kids I was around seemed to have some kind of diagnosis or some kind of symptoms, like the things like babies were having reflux or chronic diarrhea, or just everybody seemed to have something. And once I really started to dig into it and really try and understand what might have been causing all these symptoms, because children are not supposed to be sick. They're just not, unless they're, really malnourished, or they have some kind of horrible, environmental situation, which isn't supposed to be typical. They're not supposed to be sick. So that sense of panic really got me on this journey to better understand, what was happening with this current generation of children. Why were they so sick? And, was this typical? And I felt like when I, looked out at that problem, I thought, all right, I'm writing this book. I'm starting a nonprofit. I'm going to raise the alarm bells and let everybody know what's going on. Everyone's going to, once they know, they're going to be just as alarmed as I am, and they're going to get on it. We're going to change policy. I mean, I had this really kind of Pollyanna-ish viewpoint on what people would do once the alarm bells were raised. Well, I found it was very, very challenging to get people's attention, that people weren't either, when you talked about it, they didn't quite get it. They didn't quite understand it. And oftentimes people really only see this kind of thing through their own personal experience. Do they have a child with autism? Do they have a child with an autoimmune disease? And if not, maybe they're not alarmed. So I felt like, when I started this work, I felt like it was going to be something we could get on top of, and surely people would be concerned, and surely people would make changes. Well, fast forward, it's been 15 years, almost 15 years. And, I still see that most people are asleep to this problem. Most people, unless they're parents of children who have some kind of chronic health condition or developmental condition, they're not really paying attention. Certainly policymakers aren't paying attention the way they should be. And so I feel like, what has changed in terms of, are we doing things differently to protect these children? Not really. There's some protections in place. And where I do see changes happening is that there, I think, is movement towards consumer products that are safer. People are looking, starting to pay attention to environmental things like toxins in children's products, toxins or chemicals in the food supply. There is a growing movement where people are paying attention to things in their environment, what they put on their skin, what they're eating. Where I don't think there's enough movement is in what I would say would be one of the most important things that needs to happen to help this generation of children is widespread adoption of a root causes, holistic, functional medicine kind of approach to addressing chronic health conditions and developmental conditions in children. So right now, most of the services that are out there to help these children overcome their conditions are kind of on the periphery. They're not paid for by insurance. So that's what I feel like we really need to get to next, is where that becomes widespread, where all of our medical care or health care for children and for all of us is root causes care. It is the pharmaceutical symptom suppressive type care that most people are used to. So that would be a change I'd really like to see. We're getting there on the environmental piece. I think people are waking up to some of the environmental concerns, but the healthcare system hasn't changed much in the last 15 years. Small baby steps and increments, but we have a lot of work to do there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that there is, unfortunately, there's a bit of a attitude of like, well, the doctor knows best. If the doctor tells me there's nothing really wrong, there's nothing really to be done about this, it's just they'll grow out of it, kind of a thing, right? And let's face it, most of the healthcare, even for adults in this country, is not based on any kind of comprehensive system. I know in your book you talk about Chinese medicine and how it, looks at the whole person, and there is this movement of function, more towards functional medicine, and that has its, some are more effective than others as well within that. So, do you know, is there really much emphasis in the medical schools and things like that? Because I think somehow that has to, it has to at least start somewhere, right?
Right. Well, it depends on what kind of medical school you're talking about, right? Like if you're talking about osteopathic, chiropractic, naturopathic medical schools, they're doing a great job because they are training their physicians to look holistically, to use a systems perspective, to look for root causes. But the conventional medical communities, the allopathic medical schools are not training their physicians that way. In fact, most physicians walk out of medical school with very little, if any, nutrition training. Like they might get a couple hours max. There's something very wrong with that. If nutrition is not taught in medical school, it should be deeply taught. It should be foundational for what physicians get in their training. I think that we are kind of locked into this system right now. Again, the pharmaceutical symptom suppressive kind of model has a stranglehold on our medical training. So that's not the fault of the physicians. I mean, I think the physicians in this country, in the West in particular, are some of the most highly educated, smartest, most motivated, oftentimes the most caring people. They fall into those professions for a reason, but their training doesn't use a holistic approach. It doesn't look for root causes. So it's not really their fault that they don't know how to treat this generation of kids or anyone with chronic illness, right? Conventional medicine is excellent for emergency care, for surgery, for these things. I mean, some of the things they can do are just mind-blowing, right? And I'm so grateful that we have a medical system that can do these complex things and help, trauma victims and keep people alive in circumstances when they wouldn't otherwise be. But chronic illness is not done well by conventional Western medicine. So I do see some changes, though. There is a medical school that hasn't launched just yet. Soon, it's affiliated with the University of Arkansas, and it's the Helen R. Walton Medical School that she's just launching now. So Helen Walton, as you may know, is a philanthropist who has decided that she wants a whole health medical school, which is awesome. So what they're reporting is that she's actually agreed to pay for the first 4 classes of tuition to this medical school. So it's not, as far as I know, it's not live, it's not open yet, but they're building this medical school. So that to me is very promising. That's something to look forward to. And again, like I said before, the naturopathic schools, their enrollment is growing every year. Chiropractic schools enrollment are growing. Osteopathic training is increasing. So I feel very hopeful and optimistic that those sorts of things are becoming more mainstream. As I've said, we have a lot of work to do, but I think the trend is heading in the right direction.
I agree. And I think, like being I was a chiropractor in the 80s and the 90s, and the joke was, move into a town where there were other chiropractors so you didn't have to work so hard to let people know what you were trying to do, right? So
Mhm.
there is this I think there is this yearning in people to have some alternatives, but I think there's also fear, like if I step out of the box that my parents were in, and the culture at large is in, then am I actually risking doing more harm by
Mhm.
stepping away from what we could consider the cultural norm, that kind of a thing. um, but I do think there is, within the model that we're in today, there is no pill for a chronic disease, right? So the conditions themselves are calling for something different. And more and more people, I read recently, like there's they're estimating that 50% of the children in this country have some form of chronic disease.
Oh yeah, it's higher than that actually. So in 2011, there was a paper that was published in the Journal of Academic Pediatrics, and they had cited 54% of American children have at least one chronic illness diagnosis, and oftentimes two, three, or four. This is an unbelievable statistic. That was 2011. And nobody, and believe me, I've looked for this, nobody has published a similar study since. So we're going back almost 15 years here. And the last time somebody looked comprehensively at the status of children's health. No, they've looked individually at different conditions. So asthma has increased, ADHD has increased, went from like 5% 10 years ago to now 12% of kids have ADHD. Life-threatening food allergies used to be like 2%. Now it's all the way up to like 18 or 19% of kids have a life-threatening food allergy. So those individual things are being looked at. Autism would be another one. Autism, when I started this work, was 1 in 150 kids, and now it's looking like 1 in 30. CDC has come out with 1 in 36, but that doesn't include updated numbers. In other words, they're usually about 2 years behind in sort of what the actual numbers are. So in California, they've even done studies where 1 in 20 children have an autism spectrum diagnosis. In New Jersey and Utah, there are certain localities that have higher rates of it. So people see what's happening, but they're not putting the big picture together. Like, so if you're affected by one of those conditions, you can be like, oh yeah, there seems to be more asthma in kids today, but they're not connecting it to the autism. They're not connecting it to the autoimmune diseases. They're not connecting it to the life-threatening food allergies, but they all add up and basically tell the story that our kids are the sickest we've ever seen. And we've never seen a population that looks like this. And it's a function of living in the modern industrial world, basically. So I don't think people are waking up to the big picture, but at least I do see some alarm bells being raised in the individual disease categories, because people know that's not right. Like they can remember when they were kids, and they can remember that there was no kids in their classrooms that had asthma inhalers. There were no special education classrooms that were bursting at the seams. There might have been a small number of children who had special needs that needed support, but it wasn't like it is today. So people see it, but maybe don't necessarily know why it's happening or what to do about it.
It reminds me to this phrase I read in some of the materials I was looking at. It's like this total load theory. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, that really reflects the fact that we're all living in a kind of a toxic soup. There's the BPAs in the soup cans. There's, who knows what's being released from all the factories all around us, and the EMFs. I was reading there was a study that were even realizing that the EMFs are impacting the microbes in the ground, in the soil.
Right.
So from the food to the water to the air, we've really kind of come to a crisis in
Right.
all of that. And we're all also uniquely figured with DNA and our genetics and our heredity. And so it's not a surprise to me that certain kids and people, adults as well, will present with certain symptoms in that, because that's what their constitution is doing to best try to heal them, right? Like I see that the symptoms are, a cry for help. The body is doing the best it can to survive whatever it's encountering.
Exactly.
So in that, do you want to talk about this autism study that you recently were a part of? That was hugely encouraging to me.
Yeah. So I've been documenting cases of children who have fully reversed their autism diagnosis over the last 15 years. And many of these cases just sit in the realm of anecdote. I know the parents, I know the kids personally. I've seen them before, I've seen them after. So I've written these up. I've asked the parents to write them up. We've documented some of them on video. So this is something that I feel very familiar with, that many cases of autism, the symptoms can improve, and oftentimes they can fully lose the diagnosis. So the paper that we published recently was a case report. So it was basically examining the case of a set of twins that were diagnosed with autism level 3, which is severe autism. And they had this done at a reputable institution at Walter Reed. And the family actually applied to participate in a study that our organization was running. The study is called the Flight Study. And that study is a longitudinal study that looks at what happens when you reduce the total load of environmental stressors on an individual child. So the study was designed to test the hypothesis that is the total load of all the things you talked about, the chemicals, the EMFs, the medical interventions, the emotional stress, the fast pace of life, like all of those things contribute to the development of autism. And the study could only take a few children in it because we only had limited funding. So this family with twins applied to be in the study, where we would, in theory, if we could enroll them, we would evaluate their entire environment. We would have an environmental consultant come in and look at their home. We'd look for mold, we look for chemicals, we look for EMFs. We'd have them bio-individually evaluated by functional medicine or integrative type practitioners. We'd basically find out where are the imbalances in their body, nutritionally, chemically, wherever it may be, and what can we do to balance that? That's the premise of this study. So the family wanted to be in this study, but as I said, we didn't have the funding to take them. They said, that's okay. We're going to roughly model what you guys are doing in this study on our own and build our own program. So they actually joined we have an online community called Healing Together, which is a community we invite parents in. We teach them how to do some of the nutrition and diet and lifestyle changes. We teach them about personalized healing therapeutics that are available. So this family joined that. This family also worked with many of the practitioners that were part of our study. So they essentially emulated what we were doing in this study. And over the course of a little bit less than 2 years, both girls significantly improved in their autism. And one went from level 3 severity down to a 4 on ATEC, which if you know anything about the ATEC is a scale for autism. The higher number is worse and the lower number is better. Both girls significantly improved. So one no longer qualifies for the autism diagnosis, and the other one is pretty much getting back into line with her sister. She still has a little bit of work to do. But this family was really wonderful because they did diet interventions. They worked with holistic practitioners. They worked with an osteopath, a homeopath. They worked with a chiropractor. They worked with a homotoxicologist. They had a whole basically team that they used to help identify the things that their daughters needed to get back onto a typical developmental trajectory. And they had amazing success. So we published this paper in a peer-reviewed journal, and we've gotten a ton of attention on it because I think that most people think autism is genetic. It's lifelong. It's based in the brain. People just think differently, and they'll always be that way. And that's not the case, right? There are some cases of autism that do have a predominantly genetic component. So that would be things like Rett syndrome or Fragile X, where, there's limitations to what you can do because of the genetic and chromosomal things that are happening. But in the vast majority of cases of autism, what we might call modern autism, right, or environmentally triggered autism, there's much you can do. That doesn't mean every person has the capability or the means or the resources to be able to fully reverse their autism symptoms. But it does mean that there is hope for reversal once a child is diagnosed. And the other thing to remember about autism is neurodevelopmental and neurobehavioral. So what it really is about is that these children experience a total load of stressors that is too great for their body to be able to deal with during a critical developmental time. And when your body has a total load that is too great, when you're trying to learn how to walk and talk and interact with other humans and read social cues and do all those complex human things during that tiny little developmental window, but instead your body is dealing with BPA, as you mentioned, or lead or cadmium, or is dealing with microbial metabolites from gut bacteria that's out of balance because the child took too many antibiotics, or all of these things that the body is like literally just trying to survive. So if you're in a state of survival, you're going to prioritize that over development. So you're not going to grow the way you're supposed to. You're not going to develop and hit all those milestones, the crawling, the walking, the rolling over, the figuring out how to move through space in a way that we're supposed to as humans. That's what autism is largely for many, many cases. And it's a heterogeneous diagnostic category. You have people who have autism who are, you probably can't even tell they have autism because they operate in a pretty typical way. Maybe don't have any of the stereotypical behaviors, but maybe have sensory sensitivities or other hallmarks of autism. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have children or adults who are non-speaking, who can't toilet on their own, who can't do much at all independently, who are self-injurious. And one of the things that we do, which is a disservice to everybody who has this diagnostic label, is we group them all together. But that you're talking about a completely different set of people. So what I'm really talking about is that I think we have a huge imperative to serve the children and adults who are severely affected, who don't have the capacity to live independently, to try and help their bodies get as healthy as possible, to get back onto a normal developmental trajectory. And for those people, children and adults who have a more milder form of autism, what can we do to help them optimize their health? Just like you might with somebody who has depression, or somebody who has anxiety, or somebody who has environmental allergies, right? Like, let's just all do what we can to help get better and optimize our health. And especially for our children who just, they need us to do that. They're dependent upon us to keep them healthy.
And, that's a really good point, because as an adult, if I have something that is bothering me physically or whatever, I can look and see, oh, did I eat something that didn't agree with me? Or did I, I'm hugely sensitive to like perfumey smells. So if I'm around some of that kind of stuff, that can really so I understand how to like modulate my environment and make changes to support myself. But I can't even imagine how a 18-month-old child is even set up in any way to even deal with any of that. So they really are 100% dependent on the adults in their environment.
Right. And some of the behaviors that you see in these children with autism, like the stimming or repetitive behaviors, or maybe the self-injurious things, you hear about children who are, hitting their heads against the walls, or, those are ways that they are dealing with an overload of stimulus in their environment. Like their system has not been wired properly to process sensory input. So what do? They stim. That helps them. Stimming meaning like repetitive behaviors, for instance, and that might help them to regulate their nervous system, because they can't do it doesn't happen naturally because their body was never allowed to develop that capability, right? And as a chiropractor, I'm sure you know intimately the importance of the development of the nervous system and how everything is downstream from that, and how these kids are just doing the best they can, bringing in all this sensory input in a world that they're not prepared to do that. They just haven't, developed what they need, the resources they need to be able to do that.
Yeah. So I'm hugely encouraged, that there are people like you out there doing this work. And do you want to talk a little bit about what are some, because being a parent and having a child with these chronic conditions, particularly autism, which, unfortunately has a lot of social stigma to it and is, hugely mysterious to most people. Like we don't really, it's not, like, oh, they have asthma, so they're having allergies, and, it's kind of understandable, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of support, or what kind of elements or things do you find that are more available now that might not have been there before?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think, especially in the autism community, a lot of parents are looking for, therapies or supplements or things that are going to, help address their child's issue. But what we find, and what we've documented over the last decade plus, is that the families that really focus on the foundations, on the basics, are the ones that do the best in terms of helping their children overcome these conditions. So when I say the basics, I'm talking about food, sleep, movement, time outside in nature. So if you don't have those things squared away, it's probably not even going to be worth your time and money to be spending on the OT and the PT and the speech language pathologist and these expensive therapies that are out there. Like, literally just start with changing your diet. That is the most important thing you could probably do. And creating a home environment where the child feels safe. So safe from chemicals, right? Like, the body is constantly picking up stimulus, right? So the body is picking up, like, it's surrounded by toxins, whether it's laundry detergent that has fragrances in it that are toxic, or whether it's cleaning products that have toxic chemicals in it. The body is picking that up, and it is putting itself into a state of alert, whether that's the food that the child is eating that has preservatives, additives. And we're now finding there's heavy metals in all these processed foods. I mean, there's research investigations into that, like, things that you thought were healthy and safe may not be healthy and safe, you know, if it's been through that sort of processing. So those are like the foundations: a whole foods organic diet that's nutrient dense, that features a lot of fiber and vegetables. You know, a lot of kids have developed sensitivities. So sensitivities to gluten and to dairy and soy and corn. And so sometimes those can keep, when you keep feeding children the foods that they have sensitivities to, they stay in a state of chronic inflammation. So it's really about identifying the things in the environment that might be an inflammatory trigger for your child, whether it's chemicals or food, but also the emotional environment. How stressed is mom and dad? Everybody's right now, it's like dealing with inflation and dealing with finances that are, you know, really challenging. And kids feel that at home, and mom and dad are stressed, and mom's working 2 jobs and dad's working 2 jobs. And that kind of environment in the home, that's the child feels that, and that creates that sense of the lack of safety and stress. And the body cannot heal unless it feels like it is safe. It's in that state of parasympathetic, relaxed, heal and rest and digest kind of state. That's when the body overcomes the developmental delays. That's when it overcomes the allergies and the sensitivities and things like that. So it all comes back to, what can we do to make our children feel safe in their environment, safe emotionally, and what can we do to nourish their bodies in terms of food and environment. And I think one of the most nourishing things that a child can do is be outside in the natural sunlight, in fresh air, becoming increasingly hard given how, you know, the air pollution and how the modern world has really just polluted so many things in our environment. But being outside in nature and moving in a natural way, you know, if we think about how we take these kids and we put them in their car seats, and we put them in their jumpers and their bouncers and all these little things, those were never around, you know, for time immemorial. As long as children have been born and have gone through their developmental trajectory, they have never put in these seats and strapped in. But that's the modern child, right? So how is a modern child expected to really develop the brain-body connection and the intricate communication that has to happen there if they're not moving and exploring their world? So that's what I mean when I say foundations of movement, foundations of environment, foundations of diet. Once you have those done, then you can get into the more complex things, but that's the absolute easiest, low-cost way to tackle this kind of problem.
And fortunately, that's actually readily available. You know, it's not some you know, some miracle drug that, you know, only a few can afford, those kinds of things. So that, and it really, to me, it really reflects back kind of a movement in culture in general. You know, there is somewhat of a movement back to the land. You know, there's more people homesteading. There's more people. I read somewhere that, you know, over 50% of the people, since the shutdown, over 50% of the people have gardens in their yard. And I find that hugely encouraging. And if we could grow our own food, we know where it's coming from, right? And the act of being with your hands in the dirt and you know, being outside and all those things, it's, you know, in some ways when we had to do that, we were probably healthier than when we had, you know, had the opportunity to go to the store and just buy something in plastic wrap, right?
Exactly.
So it almost seems like the conditions that we're addressing and the conditions that we're being faced with are actually pointing us back into maybe possibly a simpler way of living. And that's
100%. Yeah, I mean, that's all the symptoms are. You know, if you or your child gets a diagnosis or is dealing with chronic symptoms, that's just communication from your body. Your body's like, hey, you guys, something is wrong here. Something's bothering me. And we just ignore it. And I think one of the reasons why we do is because we are stuck in this paradigm of genetic determinism. Somewhere along the line in like the 1960s, it really took off where people started thinking health was a function of your genes. So if your father had heart disease, that meant you were going to get heart disease without looking at like, well, what did dad eat? What was in his environment? What was his stress level? You know, it took over our concept of what it means to be healthy. So we sort of are like, oh, well, it must be the genes. And when you get a diagnosis, you're like, oh, it's just my bad genes, without giving credence to the many things that you can do. You know, genes are just, you know, with the whole field of epigenetics, I'm surprised this hasn't really people haven't grabbed onto this yet, that like you can actually upregulate, downregulate genes by the things that you're doing, including thinking, including your mindset. So that is the piece that I really hope we start to embrace, is that you can actually modulate your own genetic expression through food, through mindset, through movement, through your environment. And if we could just shift and start thinking about that, thinking about things that way, and like I said, respecting the symptoms when they arrive as a messenger that something in our environment isn't right, we will revolutionize healthcare. But we just really need to make that cultural shift to start thinking that, you know, the symptoms are a gift. They're a warning system. They're your alert to change the way you're living.
Right. So true. Because I mean, we are actually living epigenetically. You know, if you choose to buy, you know, processed foods that have a lot of additives and preservatives in it, that gives it some shelf life, versus buying something fresh that may spoil if you don't eat it right away. You know, you're constantly influencing your own health by even just those daily choices. And you know, obviously we're making those choices for our children. And I think bringing that into our consciousness is not only going to make ourselves healthier, but support our children in a much better way. Well, this has been hugely delightful, and I'm so just pleased to be able to have this conversation with you. Do you want to speak a little bit about some of the things you have coming up that are ways for people to educate themselves more and be more participatory in that community?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's so important to us is that we have services and resources available for parents who want to change their lifestyle, who want to support their child in a bio-individual way. So we have tons of ways that you can learn more about how to do these things. One is on our website, epidemicanswers.org, which is our resource library. You can find articles, you can find free webinars, you can find a practitioner directory where we have those integrative and holistic practitioners listed. We have a health coach training, we have a health coach directory. We also have an annual conference that is called Adventures in Healing, because this is not a doom and gloom children's chronic illness conference. This is we are getting the people together who know how to help kids heal, and the parents who want to do that. We get together and it's like this high vibing, amazing conference with incredible speakers. That's every November in Orlando. So people can join us for that conference. We also have, as I mentioned earlier, an online membership community. So if people can't make it to the conference in person, you can join us on our membership community. It's called Healing Together. And you can, for very little cost, join twice a month for live Zoom calls with an integrative physician and health coaches who can answer your questions. You have questions about diets or supplements or therapies. They're literally there to help you, support you. We have that all subsidized by donors. So it's, incredible resource for parents. And a lot of that you can find by going to documentinghope.com, and everything links out from that website.
That's fantastic. And I'll drop all those things, all those hyperlinks and all those resources. I'll drop that into the notes here from today. And just thank you again for everything that you're doing. And I think that the more we can hold that positive, you know, the future is actually becoming more clear and brighter because we're attending to it. You know, we are noticing the alarms, we are noticing the help me over here signals. And I think that's how it's all going to move forward. And again, thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great talking with you, Alex.